Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week, taking some requests from the comments. This one I found from the Grimner. It says, "This is the song I've always considered the gold standard in terms of symphonic composition and storytelling in metal. Bal-Sagoth, the Hammer of the Emperor. I do believe you'll have fun with this one." So that's what we're going to be checking out today. Got some good old-fashioned symphonic metal at hand. Looks like it'll be telling a bit of a story as well. I don't know, let's dig into it and see what's going on.
Sinistrous legend fulgurates from me. My name is a word of power on the lips of my followers. You can't escape me. I'm inside your mind. Beware the grand arbiter of temporal jurisprudence.
Very theatric. We have the marching snare in the background.
Terrible shall be thy punishment. In the ceaseless shadow at the center of infinity, the spheres have aligned. After the day comes the night. My time. My time has come.
Yeah, the trumpet alongside this specific guitar tone is really nice. Passing off that brass line to the string now. How seldom falls the opportunity to forge an empire without bloodshed. It will yet come to war. I do like that flute line. Against the chaos of the metal. I never finished that idea. The slower moving orchestral lines I think work really well against those 16th notes on the guitars. And it creates a nice opposing movement form while still keeping the direction very clearly pushing forward. You're going to get another narrative. Interesting turn there.
Stars to adorn me. The permanent extinction, a parting gift. And your maleficent soul walk only in dark places.
I'm very conflicted on this. I think primarily because I'm trying to figure out what it's supposed to be, what it's supposed to be doing. Um, there are moments I think that work in a vacuum, but overall I must be missing something because the song doesn't really seem to mean much to me. Maybe when I look at what the spoken word is doing, it'll make a bit more sense, but the song is just a series of sections that smash together seemingly two different bits. I've made a couple of comments about how I enjoyed how, X orchestral element was working with Y metal element, but I feel for a track that is symphonic metal, they were kind of oil and water for a majority of the track. The orchestral parts were written well for what they were mostly, which is overarching, longer foundational melody, and atmosphere. The guitars usually took the lead melody riff in almost every section they were present. The orchestra was there to provide the texture both harmonically and sonically, as well as the foundation, which is perfectly fine. Honestly, if the guitars weren't there, some other instrument, probably flutes or violins or trumpets, would have been playing that same melody line over top the foundational orchestral stuff. Um, and there was some really nice layering of ornamental ideas throughout as well. It's not that it was bad writing, it just the metal parts were fine too. There were some solid riffs in here. I just I just failed to see the cohesion in a majority of the sections. Honestly, for quite some time, it felt like I had two tabs open that just happened to be in the same tempo and key. Um, and maybe that's the point of it, right? You know, harmony and harmonious writing and complementary writing isn't necessarily what music can has to be as an art form. If they wanted to write something that was contrasty, they absolutely nailed it. If they wanted to write something that was thematically aiming for opposition, I think they absolutely nailed it. And that's why I'm sort of conflicted on this. I think it's because of preconceived biases about what symphonic metal is. I think it's very rare. Let me take that back. I'll walk that back a second. It's rare for me to hear symphonic metal in a way where the orchestral elements don't complement the metal, or vice versa in some bands where I feel like the metal is a secondary component to the orchestra. But they tend to work together in order to elevate whatever specific idea they're aiming for, and here they're working against each other in many sections. And like I said, it may be completely intentional. It may have thematic purpose. It may just be the sound they want. It's just different from what I'm used to hearing, and I'm trying to work my way through that. Beyond that, though, I also have to question what the song is aiming for, what it's doing. Thematically, the vocals give me ominous vibes. It's a little bit of the inflection, it's a little bit of the range, it's a little bit of all of it. It has an edgy manner to it that feels like some kid trying to be goth, right? And man, it's not any criticism towards the vocal delivery at all. It certainly achieves what it wants to, I'm going to assume, but that's what it feels like. I hear a lot of this in the gothy industrial side of music, and to me, I'm bringing my biases into it like everybody does. We have our subjective elements of listening to music, but it's a little cringe. I've said the same thing about Avatar before. Um, it feels a little forced, is all I think. And maybe it's just because it's not my cup of tea. I don't know. But we have this element that it's supposed to be a little bit mysterious, a little bit ominous. There's some fear that's supposed to be presented here, but it's always put over the aspects of the song that are the most serene and quiet and gentle, and usually the most orchestral as well. Um, it feels like a clash of intention there once again, and I think I might be coming around to this. If this song is about clashing of opposition, I think they're nailing it. Here's two aspects already where there's a schism, a divide between intention that I think they're absolutely pulling off now. Man, I always like that when I can talk myself into understanding something, and I start an analysis a bit, and then I end the analysis like, oh, this is fantastic for what they're doing. This might be one of those. But we contrast this with something. The larger parts of the track, the instrumental parts of the track, are a little varied in what they're aiming for. Some of them come off as monstrous, large and grand and weighty. Almost as if some sort of pressure being applied to the listener, while other sections are grand, larger than life, majestic, almost as if royalties come into town and we must play the music that makes them feel big, it makes them feel important. And is this about a king returning who is both revered and feared? someone who is, just as cruel as they are powerful. It's an interesting way to do that, to completely separate these two descriptors into two completely separate sides of the music that sort of bounces back and forth between the two rather than mix them into one. But I think it works, especially since a lot of this track is contrasty. It's two elements in opposition, and it's possible they wanted to split this out as well. And for some reason, it reminds me of that. Is it Dark Souls or Bloodborne? Bloodborne. We checked out a song from one of those FromSoft games, and it was a character theme or something. And like that did a fantastic job of marrying these two. And this is sort of like the opposite of that, where the crushing and regal elements are separated rather than intertwined into the theme. And that's actually kind of what this feels like, too. It's like narrative. So like in Greek plays, the choir would be the narrator. They're the omniscient party to the story who can see everything and can speak to the audience. And their songs tend to be very different than the pieces that would come through from the characters part of the musicals and stuff like that. Um, and that's kind of what's happening here, where our narration music is drastically different. And maybe it's not supposed to be that this song is supposed to be listened to as one whole, but a series of individual sections. We have narration sections that cut up thematic sections. And maybe the themes are different scenes entirely. Because while most of our heavy well, most of our instrumental stuff is on the heavier side, driving, crushing guitar work, metal, brutal drumming with this massive orchestral stuff on the outside. There was one more serene instrumental part, and I even said, hey, are we going to get back into some narration? And we didn't. I mean, we did eventually, but we had an instrumental bit in this style, this more serene concept. And maybe this is a lot of scenes back to back. Much like a film, if you listen to the soundtrack as a unified song, it's going to seem sort of out of place. The jumps, the transitions are going to be odd. The movements from track to track are going to be a bit difficult to understand. But if you look at them specifically as this is this scene's song and this is this scene's song, it begins to make a bit more sense. Because they're not designed to be listened to as a unified work, they're designed to support another concept. And maybe that's what's going on here. While this is a single unbroken 7-minute track, it could be comprised of ideas that represent totally different concepts because it's a part of a story, which the story aspect makes sense to me given the narration. I do wonder what goes on with the vocals though. Is the entire album narration? I think that'd be really interesting. An instrumental band who does spoken word every once in a while to progress the story. I don't know if that's what they do, but I do think that would be a very interesting concept. Without having heard anything else from them, I can't make any comment, but I am curious if this is typical for them or a bit unusual. There are a couple of things that I picked up on here that I think are very cool. One is while a lot of the orchestral stuff is atmospheric, sits on the sidelines of what the metal is doing in the middle, the wide instrumentation allow it to feel more than what a lot of the more traditional symphonic bands do, where they just bring in a violin or a cello to do chords on the outside of the band. It's still sort of in that same realm here of not really embracing too much of the classical side of the instrumentation, but I think it comes off a little bit better because while they still are just kind of doing chords on the outside, it's not exclusive to that, even if I think that is the primary usage of our wider instrumentation, we do have some nice lines. The flute line that I pointed out, the trumpet line that I pointed out, um, the section after I pointed out those trumpets early on, they passed that same line over to the strings, and it even shifted sides from left to right, if I remember correctly. So it's really nice ideas of passing off of licks. We had nice counterpoint between some of our orchestral instrumentation and our metal instrumentation throughout. And I think the most important part that lends this to feel a bit more than just metal with some extra instruments in it is the wider harmonic palette. There's actually some really nice chords in here that don't get utilized too often in metal, and not just the chords themselves, but the progression of the chords that we just don't hear too often in metal. So this isn't exactly just, we play power chords, but we have brass and string sitting around us. They actually do incorporate some classical elements into it that I really appreciate. And the instruments do get utilized in ways that make sense for the instruments, not from the perspective of we would have put this on a guitar, but we gave it to, a flute instead. The flutes have trills in here, which I thought was really nice. The violins have these nice long held out sections. We didn't get any staccato violin in here, which I thought would have been nice in some sections, especially with the march idea that we had at the beginning with the snare. But, I'm sure that if I listen to more of them, I will hear all sorts of variety since they seem to understand what instruments can do and what they are best at, which I think is an interesting phrase. But maybe that's a topic for another day since this one's already running a bit far on. But certain instruments can do things more easily than other instruments based on fingerings, and how difficult it is to, well, jump between certain notes, so to speak. Some instruments can do things easier than others. So there are some things that instruments tend to have an expertise in. And they seem to have a little bit of that knowledge, at least. They showcased it with the flutes regardless. Um, So I am kind of interested to listen to more of them. And I kind of talked about the emotional aspect of this, and I want to dig into that just a little bit more. What would the story be here? We have a narration, which is calm. I want to exclude that, I think, from the emotional storytelling here, as it's separate from, I think, the story at hand, because it's the narrator as a third party omniscient element that sits between us and the story itself. And so the rest of the song is aggressive mostly, dancing between elegance and brutality. And, well, the brutality mostly comes from the metal aspect, but the orchestra around it usually goes for something ominous, overpowering, weighty. What does all this mean? And I've already mentioned the idea of separating these two ideas out into separate components of a single character's theme. I don't know. It was really difficult to keep up with this, and only through talking through it have I actually come to any sort of conclusion about what I've heard, and I don't even know if anything I've said so far is accurate to the artistic intent. It is a track that I'm warming up to, though, and I think on subsequent listens it's going to make a lot more sense to me. It was rough coming out of it, but I'm beginning to grow an appreciation for what they did and what they're doing. And each word I say, I feel like I'm getting one step closer to understanding who they are as a band and what their goals might be. I'm going to take a moment here to read some lyrics. We're going to see if any of this fits anything that I've felt regarding the music, and then we're going to wrap it up. I had forgotten just how short some of these spoken word sections were. One is literally just 5 words. And I think it's supposed to be the bringing up of a new section entirely. It's supposed to divide the song. Um, in a way that feels like a narrator, but I think is really the only line that feels like a narrator. See, most of this has a me and my and I first person element to it, which feels like a character in the story. The first stanza speaks of somebody, well, the person speaking, coming into power. He says that that their name is a word of power on the lips of my followers. Right? This dude has clout. Says, you can't escape, I'm inside your mind, for when I come at last, terrible shall be thy punishment. After the day comes the night, my time has come. So he's a powerful person who has a lot of followers, and they're ready to have their power unleashed unto the world, and they're going to be judge, jury, and executioner when they come to town. The next line that comes up says, how seldom falls the opportunity to forge an empire without bloodshed. It will yet come to war. Stating that there will be opposition. There are two sides here, and maybe the second side doesn't know it yet, but the first side, presumably him and his followers, they're ready for war. And they know that you can't make an empire without one, or that, at least as far as history is concerned, it rarely happens, as he says. All of this feels diegetic. This is not a third party omniscient aspect to the story. This is all told within it. These are the thoughts of a character, or the diary, the journal of a character. This is a monologue, basically, of somebody in the story. But the very next line says, she came bearing dark portents, the foreshadowing, colon. And that feels like narration. That feels external. What follows that, though, is a character who is enthralled by this other character's beauty, but says that any time that they attempt to meet this beauty, whether physically or visually or olfactory, that's smelling, scent and stuff like that, they catch this uh, darkness that's tied to it. He says, why, when I meet your narcotic, slow-eyed gaze, does the image of a viper nestling in a bed of blossoms fill my mind? So why, when I look at you, do I see a bed of snakes? Right? That kind of concept. And he asks these questions over and over, just kind of changing it. Why, when I do this to you, do I get this darkness? Right? And then eventually, just straight up calls her a witch. He says, such wicked thorns beneath this rose, come witch, fly to me, a garland of newborn stars to adorn thee. So there is this person to which he is enthralled with, uh, and wants her by his side. What's interesting, though, is that a lot of the questioning, why, when I see this unassuming element, do I get this negative component to it? But if it is the same person we started with, you would think that they would want all this darkness and negativity on their side, as that seems to be who they are. Seems like the perfect queen partner to their rule here. But given that one line, she came bearing dark portents, the foreshadowing, colon, it really would seem like that's a chapter break almost. It's the shortest of the delivered spoken word. It feels the least in character. everything is about this person and their experience. This seems to be describing what's coming up next. Have we changed characters? I don't know. And I'm going to bring it up. I think this is why more people should embrace voices in their story-based works. I don't care if you got to bring on more vocalists. I don't care if you got to learn how to do different vocal styles, different harshes. There's got to be a way to differentiate characters, and maybe that's not what's happening here. But there's such a shift on that one line and the entire back half of this track vocally that it doesn't feel connected to our first. And having some sort of indication, even if it's just in the liner notes, in the lyrics, let me know that we've changed things. I think that would really help people understand what's going on. I have the same problem with Coheed and Cambria. It's so difficult to tell who's talking about when, who's doing what singing when they're all the same voice. And it's something you pick up the more you ingest the story, right? But it's so difficult on a first listen. I mean, imagine watching a film where everybody's the same actor. Even worse, everybody's wearing the same outfit. And you have to like guess based on location and what topics they're talking about as to what character each is. Like, man, that would just be so annoying. And again, I don't know if that's specifically what's happening here. This might not even be a narrative story. This might not even be a concept album, which I haven't said yet, but I kind of think it is based on how all this is presented to me. But if so, and if these are different characters, it's very difficult to keep up with everything that's going on. As far as tying this into the music, there is something ominous going on here. There is somebody quite in power who has a following. So the crushing weight, the impending doom, the ominous elements in the music, but also that regal triumphantness? Triumph? Yeah, just triumph. All kind of fit into this idea of someone coming into power and ready to take over. And them not having the greatest of intentions for everyone, I think fits well with a lot of the musicality that's going on. Those are my thoughts on Bal-Sagoth's The Hammer of the Emperor. Let me know what you thought, though. Put your comments, perspectives, opinions, if you enjoyed it or not, disagree with me, if you have something to add, all that stuff down in the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you to this menu. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, we have one more track today that's coming from the comments section. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow. We're going to do our Sounds from the Inbox, a 1 hour block of just checking out smaller bands who are trying to get their stuff heard. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.